Did Jesus of Nazareth really exist? Was he a genuine historical person who lived in first-century Judea, or is the story of his life a later invention or myth? Some skeptics claim there is no evidence outside the Bible to support his existence. This claim, however, does not hold up under historical scrutiny. There are multiple independent non-Christian sources from the ancient world that confirm Jesus was a real person who lived and died in the first century. These sources come from Roman officials, Jewish historians, and imperial records written within roughly 100 years of his crucifixion. Importantly, none of the writers were Christians themselves. They had no reason to promote the Christian message. In many cases, they were either indifferent or openly hostile toward it. Their references, though brief, are powerful because they treat Jesus as an undisputed historical figure rather than a legendary character. One of the earliest indirect references appears in connection with the Roman Emperor Claudius, who ruled from AD 41 to 54. Around AD 49, Claudius issued an edict expelling Jews from the city of Rome. The Roman historian Suetonius, writing in the early 2nd century, recorded the reason. The Jews were constantly rioting at the instigation of one Chrestus. Most scholars see Chrestus as a common Roman misspelling or variant of Christus, referring to Jesus Christ. The disturbances likely arose from conflicts within the Jewish community in Rome between those who accepted Jesus as the Messiah and those who rejected him. This event happened only about 20 years after the crucifixion, showing how quickly the message about Jesus had spread, even reaching the imperial capital and causing noticeable social tension. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus provides two important references to Jesus. Josephus was a Jewish aristocrat and military commander who later became a Roman citizen. He wrote his major work, Antiquities of the Jews, around AD 93, about 60 years after Jesus' death. In one passage, Book 20, he describes the illegal execution of a man named James, whom he identifies as the brother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. This reference is widely accepted by scholars as authentic. It confirms that Jesus had a brother named James who was known to the Jewish community, and that Jesus himself was called the Messiah by some of his followers. Josephus's second mention of Jesus, known as the Testimonium Flavianum in Book 18, is longer and more controversial because some Christian scribes appear to have added phrases that amplify the praise. Even when those likely interpolations are removed, the core text still affirms that Jesus was a wise teacher who performed surprising deeds, attracted both Jewish and Gentile followers, and was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Josephus notes that Jesus' followers continued after his death. Written by a non-Christian Jew who had every cultural reason not to highlight messianic claimants, this passage carries significant weight. The Roman senator and historian Tacitus gives us one of the clearest non-Christian confirmations. In his Annals, written around AD 116, Tacitus describes the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64 and how Emperor Nero blamed the Christians for it. Tacitus explains that the name Christian comes from Christus, who suffered the extreme penalty set to crucifixion during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of the procurator Pontius Pilate. Tacitus clearly disliked Christians, calling their beliefs a mischievous superstition, yet he had no doubt that their founder was a real historical person executed by Roman authority. As a careful historian writing from the center of the empire, Tacitus had access to official records and reports. Around the same time, Pliny the Younger, the Roman governor of Bithynia, wrote to Emperor Trajan around AD 111-112 seeking advice on how to handle Christians. In his letter, Pliny describes Christians gathering before dawn to sing hymns to Christ as to a god. He notes their strong moral code and their refusal to curse Christ, even under threat of punishment. Like Tacitus, Pliny was no friend of Christianity. He was actively persecuting Christians and executing those who would not renounce their faith. Yet he treats Christ as a real figure at the center of their worship. These four sources, an imperial decree under Claudius, the writings of Josephus, Tacitus, and Pliny the Younger, come from different perspectives: Roman imperial, Jewish, and provincial administrative. They were written by people who had no interest in promoting Christianity. Together they paint a consistent picture. Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical person. He lived in Judea, gathered followers, was called the Messiah by some, and was executed by crucifixion under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. His movement continued and spread rapidly enough to cause disturbances in Rome within 2 decades of his death. This evidence is especially strong when we consider the standards of ancient history. We accept the existence of many figures from the ancient world with far less documentation. For example, we have less contemporary evidence for some Roman emperors or Jewish leaders than we do for Jesus. The rapid emergence of Christianity itself is difficult to explain without a real founder whose life and death made an extraordinary impact. Within a generation, the movement had spread across the Roman Empire despite intense persecution. People do not willingly suffer and die for a known myth. The early Christians, including the apostles, proclaimed the resurrection in the very city where Jesus had been crucified, an environment where their claims could easily have been disproven if false. Skeptics sometimes dismiss these references by arguing they are too late or dependent on Christian sources. However, the writers show no signs of simply copying Christian beliefs. They often include details or tones that reflect their own cultural biases. Tacitus and Pliny treat Christianity as a dangerous superstition. Josephus remains a practicing Jew who does not endorse Christian claims. Their independence actually strengthens the historical case. The New Testament documents themselves also function as historical sources when evaluated fairly. The letters of Paul, written in the 50s AD, contain early creeds and traditions that date back even closer to the events. Paul mentions meeting with Jesus' brother James and the Apostle Peter, providing multiple lines of eyewitness connection. The Gospels, though written with theological purpose, follow the pattern of ancient biographies and contain details that align with what we know of first-century Judea from archaeology and other historians. The denial of Jesus' existence, often called mythicism, remains a fringe position among professional historians and biblical scholars, including non-Christian ones. The vast majority of experts across the spectrum agree that Jesus existed as a historical figure. The debate today centers more on how much we can know about his life, teachings, and the resurrection claims, not whether he lived. This historical foundation matters. It means the story of Jesus is not a fairy tale invented centuries later. It emerged in a specific time and place among real people who were willing to stake everything on what they had seen and heard. The evidence shows that within 20 years of the crucifixion, people in Rome were already arguing heatedly about Jesus. By the early 2nd century, Roman governors were dealing with Christian communities strong enough to require official imperial attention. For those exploring faith, this historical reliability is significant. Christianity does not ask people to believe in a myth or a legend detached from reality. It invites us to examine a person who actually walked the roads of Galilee, taught in the temple in Jerusalem, was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and whose followers claimed, and many still claim today, that he rose from the dead. The question, did Jesus exist, has a clear answer supported by multiple independent ancient sources. Yes, he did. Jesus of Nazareth was a real person whose life continues to shape history more than 2,000 years later. The evidence from Roman emperors, governors, senators, and Jewish historians confirms what the early Christians proclaimed. Jesus lived, Jesus died, and the movement that began with him has never disappeared. That historical reality opens the door to the deeper question every person must eventually face. If Jesus really existed, then who do we say that he is?